Imagine standing, right in the middle of a densely packed, modern public housing estate in Hong Kong.
Right, just concrete everywhere.
Exactly. You look around and you assume you're just standing on concrete. You see these towering residential blocks, laundry hanging from the windows, utilitarian walkways. But what if I told you that you were actually standing on one of the most spiritually and historically charged acupuncture points on Earth?
It really it forces a complete reevaluation of how we read urban environments, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Because we have this tendency to view modern cities as blank slates, like as if pouring concrete just somehow completely erases the history of the earth beneath it. But the landscape remembers. I mean, the geography itself dictates what happens on top of it, regardless of what century we happen to be in.
And that structural memory is the entire focus of our deep dive today. So we're exploring the Lam Tin and Lei Yue Mun area of Kowloon East in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And our foundational source for this is this really incredible universal spiritual-geospatial historical dossier.
Which is such a mouthful, but it's brilliant.
It is, because it strips away the modern city to reveal these 5 distinct historical eras layered directly on top of each other.
Right.
We're talking about ancient indigenous fishermen, British military engineers, and modern refugees who all basically unintentionally danced to the exact same geographic tune.
Yeah, without even knowing it.
Exactly. And along the way, we're going to be pinpointing specific hidden physical remnants in the area, spots you can actually visit today to touch these historical layers yourself.
I love that. But I think, to read these layers properly, we really need to establish the primary lens of this dossier first.
Right, the framework.
Yeah, because throughout this discussion, we are going to be talking a lot about spatial memory and Feng Shui.
Which people usually misunderstand.
Completely.
Yeah.
It is so crucial to strip away that westernized kind of commercial perception of Feng Shui as just like interior decorating or some sort of exotic mysticism.
Right, it's not just where to put your sofa.
Exactly. In its original context, it's an ancient engineering language. I mean, it's a highly systematized vocabulary for reading the topography of a landscape, organizing community space, and really understanding the energetic properties, what they call the key of a specific site.
Okay, so with that in mind, we have to start at the foundational layer, long before the concrete or the British colonial era began 1841.
Right, the very bottom layer.
Yeah. This coastal strip was originally settled by Hakka and Punti village communities, and they named the area Lam Tin, which translates to indigo field.
Which sounds so peaceful.
It does. And the immediate historical explanation for that name is purely agricultural. There are records showing that indigo plants were cultivated in scattered patches around the Pearl River Delta during the Qing Dynasty.
Oh, to dye their clothes?
Yes, exactly. The farmers used it to dye those distinctive blue working garments.
But there's more to it than just farming, right? That agricultural reality sits right alongside a much deeper cosmological reading in the dossier.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Well, in classical Chinese 5-element spatial mapping, the physical environment is categorized into wood, fire, earth, metal, and water.
Right.
And the color blue, or indigo, is explicitly associated with the wood element.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and furthermore, wood is associated with the east, with the season of spring, and with a very specific energetic concept. It represents new growth and emergence under pressure.
Wait, emergence under pressure? That's, if you think about the physical mechanics of a seed in the spring, right?
Exactly.
It has to literally crack its shell and push upward through this heavy compressed soil just to reach the light.
Yes, it's this explosive upward growth fighting against immense resistance.
And that energetic concept, that growth under pressure, I mean, that's practically the thesis statement for every single community that would eventually occupy this space.
It absolutely is. And these early agrarian and fishing communities, they organize their relationship with this high-pressure environment through 3 primary spatial layers.
Okay, what were they?
First, they built earth god shrines to mark every single field boundary and settlement threshold. Then second, they venerated the mountain deities, mainly to appease those really imposing peaks directly above them.
Right, because the mountains there are huge.
Very steep, very imposing. And third, because their survival depended entirely on the coast, they worshipped Tin Hau, the goddess of the sea.
The sea goddess, yeah.
And her temples served as these massive community anchors. They were strategically sited right at the cosmological gateway between the safety of the land and the danger of the water.
And the amazing thing is, you can actually go stand in one of these gateways right now.
Yes, you can.
It's our first hidden gem. It's the Samkatsu and Tin Hau Temple, located over in the Lei Yue Mun fishing village.
Such a fascinating spot.
It is. Visiting it today is just this jarring, incredibly immersive sensory experience. Like, on a clear morning, the air is thick with a mixture of salt spray from the strait, but it's heavily layered with the really dense scent of compressed sandalwood incense smoke.
And the acoustic environment of that specific temple is just wild.
Oh, yeah.
Because of how it's situated right on the rocks, you actually hear the churning of the tidal water pushing through the narrow fishgate passage, and it echoes inside the temple walls.
Wow.
It's this signature sonic footprint that you only ever find at these specific coastal shrines, where the mountains drop at a steep angle directly into a tidal narrows.
And the statue of the goddess inside, she's not some gentle, passive figure.
No, not at all.
She is covered in gold leaf, and her expression is intensely severe. Devotees leave oranges and these little small wooden boats at her feet. Because, she is fundamentally a demanding deity of storms and crossings.
Right. She's guarding the edge of the known world.
Exactly, for a community that lost people to the sea on a fairly regular basis.
And the placement of her temple, and even those smaller earth god shrines, none of it was ever random. The dossier really highlights that in traditional village Feng Shui, shrines are sited exactly where the land energy, the qi, naturally rises to the surface and pools.
So if you think of the terrain as a living body, a modern city isn't a new body, right?
No.
It's just a heavy blanket thrown over the old one. The terrain underneath hasn't disappeared. And the pressure points, like the acupuncture points where the energy rises, they remain exactly where they always were.
Yes. Paving over a village doesn't shift the underlying geography.
Which explains so much. That's why you'll find these tiny ancient earth god shrines just stubbornly tucked into the concrete stairwells of modern Hong Kong high-rises.
Yeah, the shrine stays because the geophysical reality it marks hasn't changed an inch.
It's incredible. But there's a flip side to a narrow coastal water gate, isn't there?
There's a very dark flip side. Because a channel that forces tidal energy and fishing boats to funnel through this tiny space, it inevitably creates the perfect physical choke point for an invasion.
Right.
That exact same protective boundary became the literal threshold of fate for the entire colony.
Which pulls us right into December 1941, the outbreak of the Pacific War.
Yeah.
So, on December 18th, the Japanese 38th Division launched their amphibious assault on Hong Kong Island from the Kowloon Peninsula. And they had multiple points they could have crossed, but they focused their primary assault on the Lei Yue Mun Strait.
Right next to Lam Tin.
Exactly. And they chose it because it's the easternmost point of the harbor, and critically, it's the narrowest crossing point. It's only about 300 meters wide.
And the defense of that specific 300-meter stretch of water is just an incredibly grim piece of history.
It really is.
You had elements of the Rajput Regiment from the Indian Army standing alongside a company of the Royal Rifles of Canada, and they were tasked with holding the water's edge in complete darkness.
And caught directly in the middle of this massive artillery and infantry crossfire was that exact fishing village, Sam Katsuan.
Wow.
The local Chinese population had absolutely no means of evacuation. They just had to hide right in that Tin Hau temple, listening to the water churn, while this international battle for control of the Pacific basically raged on their doorstep.
And the defense was ultimately overwhelmed, right? Which led to the surrender of Hong Kong on Black Christmas.
Yeah.
But what's really striking here is the name. The Chinese name for the strait, Lei Yue Mun, translates to carp fish gate.
Oh, like the myth.
Yes, in classical mythology, the carp that manages to swim upstream and leap the dragon gate physically transforms into a dragon.
Right, so the gate represents this ultimate threshold of transformation.
Exactly. And in the Feng Shui reading of the landscape, this strait was identified centuries ago as the controlling water gate for the entire Victoria Harbor Basin. It's literally the single aperture through which the tidal energy of the whole harbor must pass.
The structural convergence there is just what makes this dossier so compelling to me.
Oh, it's mind-blowing.
Because the Japanese military planners, they definitely were not consulting local geomancers to plan their amphibious assault.
I would assume not, no.
Right. They chose the strait for purely tactical reasons. It offered the shortest physical distance across the water, it maximized the cover of darkness, and it sat directly beneath commanding high ground.
Right.
But their modern tactical logic perfectly mapped onto the ancient cosmological logic. Both the military geographers and the Feng Shui masters independently analyzed the exact same physical space and arrived at the exact same conclusion.
That this specific 300-meter gap is the node where control of the entire system is decided.
Exactly. But if you want to control a narrow strait, I mean, military logic dictates that you absolutely have to control the high ground looming above it,
We
right?
have to.
And rising directly over Lam Tin is a mountain with a name that immediately signals its historical role, Devil's Peak.
Or Demon Mountain in
Yeah.
its direct translation.
Right.
And in the spatial language we've been discussing, a mountain is categorized by its energetic output. It's either a protective dragon, which, radiates generative sheltering energy down to the settlements below.
Like a good mountain.
Right. Or it's an attacking Shah, which radiates destructive killing energy.
And a peak named Demon Mountain is clearly not a protective dragon.
Definitely not. It signals pure hostile energy. And because of its commanding vertical view over that narrow harbor gate, the mountain attracted intense colonial militarization.
Makes sense.
To guard the strait against rival imperial powers, the British built this massive defense network on Devil's Peak in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And at the base of this hostile mountain, right at the water's edge, they installed a Brennan torpedo station.
Okay, the mechanics of the Brennan torpedo are fascinating to me.
It's so sci-fi for the era.
It really is. It was
Yeah.
this early wire-guided missile system used by the British Empire to defend strategic harbors. It had two counter-rotating propellers driven by incredibly strong steel wires, which were being rapidly pulled back by a steam engine on the shore.
Wow.
Yeah, so a human operator on the coast would use these wires to physically steer the torpedo directly into the hull of a hostile naval ship, trying to force its way through the gate.
That is intense.
It's literally a mechanical guardian tethered to the threshold. It functions exactly like a technological version of a mention.
The traditional Chinese gate deities.
Right. Like if you walk up to a traditional temple, you see the mention painted on the heavy wooden doors. They are these fierce armed deities staring outward to block demonic energy from penetrating the sanctuary.
That is such a cool parallel.
The British engineers with their steam-powered torpedo wires and the Chinese cosmologists with their painted door gods, they were basically utilizing totally different vocabularies to invent the exact same spatial solution.
Because they both recognize that a highly charged threshold requires an active, vigilant guardian.
Exactly.
And to truly understand the scale of this military architecture, you really have to hike the Devil's Peak Heritage Trail today.
Oh, is it still there?
Yes, and it remains one of the most evocative physical spaces in Hong Kong. As you walk up this heavily wooded path, the ambient roar of the modern city below just drops away. And you find yourself surrounded by these massive abandoned World War I and World War II concrete batteries, and the jungle has just spent the last 80 years reclaiming them. You have these giant ficus tree roots slowly swallowing the concrete gun emplacements.
That's our next hidden gem then. The dossier describes the visceral chill of stepping into those old magazine tunnels. Apparently they are incredibly damp and just dead quiet.
Yeah, the contrast is stark.
And you can find these narrow steel observation slits embedded in the thick concrete. If you line your eye up to a slit meant for a colonial artillery spotter, you find yourself steering straight down a terrifying vertical drop at the modern hyperdense city in that exact 300-meter straight.
Oh, wow.
You can physically feel the eras collapsing into each other.
And following the destruction of World War II, that same steep, commanding hillside underwent a radical shift in its function.
Okay, how so?
It transitioned from a site of imperial military dominance to a site of really desperate civilian survival.
Ah, right. After 1949, the Civil War in China triggered a massive influx of refugees across the border into Hong Kong.
The numbers are staggering.
Yeah, up to 1 million people pouring into the territory in just a few years. And the flatlands and established urban centers were immediately overwhelmed. So, with nowhere else to go, people began building sprawling squatter communities on the steep, hostile hillsides above Lam Tin.
And they constructed homes out of whatever they could find, salvaged wood, corrugated iron, poured concrete. But these were not simply chaotic shantytowns.
Right, they had structure.
Exactly. They developed into highly organized, incredibly dense communities with their own informal economies, block committees, and this really intense religious life. And because of the demographics of the refugees, the hillside became a site of what the dossier calls involuntary syncretism.
Involuntary syncretism. So in a traditional village, you have a relatively homogeneous religious culture, right?
Yes.
But on this hillside, you had Cantonese farmers, Shanghainese factory workers, and Hakka families suddenly compressed into the same tight alleyways. They didn't have the space or the resources to build separate temples for their respective regional deities.
No, not at all.
So a Hakka deity might be placed on a makeshift wooden table right next to a Shanghainese patron saint.
They literally became roommates.
That's wild. Their religious practices were physically forced to compress together.
And the creation of these improvised temples served a dual purpose. Beyond just immediate spiritual comfort, it was a vital mechanism for establishing cosmological land tenure.
Explain that.
Well, the refugees possessed no legal paper deeds from the British colonial government to live on that hill. They were legally classified as illegal squatters. But by collectively pooling their resources to set up a shared temple and install their deities, they were asserting a really powerful claim to the territory.
Oh, because when a community anchors a divine presence to a piece of land, demolishing that land is no longer just an administrative eviction.
Exactly.
It becomes a spiritual offense.
It gave the refugees incredible leverage. I mean, the colonial government held the paper deed, sure, but the community held the deity's physical presence, making the space sacred and incredibly volatile to clear.
The spatial irony of this entire dynamic is profound to me.
How do you mean?
Because in classical Chinese cosmology, withdrawing to the steep, isolated mountainside is an action reserved for the Taoist recluse, right?
Oh, yes.
It's the enlightened master who voluntarily leaves the corrupt, chaotic lowlands to seek purity and proximity to heaven up in the high peaks.
But the people living on Devil's Peak were deeply impoverished refugees.
Right. They were placed in this classical margin of heaven, not by spiritual choice, but by absolute material necessity. According to the ancient grammar of the culture, they were geographically closer to transcendence. But in reality, they were living in extreme precarity, constantly battling typhoons, mudslides, and the threat of fire.
And if you explore the secondary forest just above the modern Lam Tin estate today, this is another hidden gem. You can still find traces of this precarious existence.
Really? What's up there?
You have to push through the undergrowth, but you will discover these flat, poured concrete platforms stained black by decades of rain and moss.
Wow.
Yeah, these are the foundations, the literal ghosts of those squatter homes. And sitting on one of these platforms gives you the exact vantage point those refugees had. They would have looked down the mountain at an open harbor horizon that has since been entirely filled in by a wall of modern skyscrapers.
And that wall of skyscrapers is the final historical shift for Lam Tin, right?
Yeah.
Beginning in the 1970s, the government systematically cleared the hillside squatter communities. The residents were pushed down from the hills and relocated into towering, standardized concrete blocks as part of the 10-year housing program.
Right, the Lam Tin estate was constructed.
And this massive relocation forced the community to invent a completely new way to organize their spatial and spiritual reality.
Because the transition from a hillside squatter camp to a brutalist concrete tower presents a massive cosmological challenge.
I can imagine.
Classical Feng Shui operates entirely on a horizontal plane. It calculates how energy flows across the topography of the land, aligning with cardinal directions, and relying on the physical presence of a mountain at your back to block harsh northern winds, and water at your front to gather energy.
But suddenly, a family is relocated to the 14th floor of an identical concrete slab.
Exactly. They do not own the ground, they don't control the layout of their windows, and they are literally suspended in midair.
But the solution the residents devised is brilliant. They took the principles of horizontal village Feng Shui and intuitively translated them onto a vertical Z-axis.
Yeah.
So inside these standardized apartments, the traditional household altar could no longer face geographic south. So the front door became the new cosmological south.
Because it's the entryway.
Right. The door was the only conduit for energy entering the home, so the altar was oriented to face it directly, guarding the threshold.
And the spatial mapping extended to the entire building, too.
Yeah.
Floor numbers essentially became the new compass points, dictated heavily by the tonal nature of the Cantonese language.
Ah, right. Because Cantonese relies on pitch to determine meaning.
Exactly. Words that sound similar can have vastly different associations. So the number 8, bat, sounds very similar to the word for wealth or prosperity, making the 8th floor highly desirable.
And then number 4.
Number 4, say, sounds almost identical to the word for death. So naturally, you avoid the 4th floor.
You know, moving from a sprawling hillside village into a high-rise block, it's mechanically similar to how we handle data on a computer.
Oh, I like this. How so?
Well, in a traditional village setting, you have a massive folder filled with distinct files. The ancestral hall sits in the center, the earth god shrines mark the outer borders, the market operates on the edge.
Right.
When the government moved everyone into the Lam Tin estate, they essentially highlighted that entire folder and compressed it into a single ZIP file.
Yes.
The public housing block is the ZIP file. The underlying data, the community hierarchies, the social networks, the spiritual boundaries, it didn't disappear. It was simply repackaged into a tightly packed vertical geometry.
That is a perfect analogy, because the architecture itself was designed by the housing authority for pure industrial efficiency, just to pack as many humans into a footprint as possible.
Right.
Yet, the residents layered their own ancient spatial logic inside that concrete grid, creating a vertical ecosystem that mirrored the horizontal structure of the old villages.
And you can observe the remnants of this process on the ground floor of the older estates today.
You really can.
The base of these residential towers consists of these sterile, identical concrete pillars. But at the base of certain specific pillars, you will notice the concrete is stained dark red and gray from decades of burning incense.
Because those stains mark the earth god shrines that actually survived the great clearances of the hillsides.
Wow.
Yeah, during the relocation process, community temple committees fiercely negotiated with housing officials to retain space for these specific shrines.
That's incredible.
Today, you will find them tucked into dark stairwell alcoves, and they are almost always protected and maintained by elderly women who serve as the unofficial custodians of the community's memory.
So the physical presence of the deity serves as a permanent record of the community's survival through basically repeated traumatic displacements.
Exactly.
When we pull back and look at all 5 of these historical realities stacked on top of each other, the indigo field pushing through the soil, the carp gate filtering the ocean, Demon Mountain guarding the harbor, the floating city clinging to the hill, and the vertical village compressing the community at a singular frequency really emerges for Lam Tin.
It does. And the overarching thesis of the dossier is that Lam Tin is not merely a location on a map. It operates as a permanent threshold geography.
Right.
From the Qing Dynasty fishermen navigating the tides, to the British military engineers laying torpedo wires, to the Japanese infantry forcing a crossing, right up to the modern civil engineers who eventually dug the Eastern Harbor Crossing Tunnel directly under the water.
Every single group independently identified this exact node as the critical point of crossing.
Yes. The community that named it Carp Gate centuries ago had already decoded the landscape. They understood what every subsequent empire and government would eventually realize. This is the choke point where the crossing happens, and this is the crucible where everything transforms.
So the people who have inhabited this space have historically existed in a perpetual state of liminality.
Absolutely.
They're a community defined entirely by their proximity to the crossing. They spend centuries guarding the threshold, grieving at the threshold, and just finding ways to survive the threshold. It's a transit space that people have repeatedly, stubbornly tried to forge into a home.
And it makes you wonder about other places, doesn't it?
It really does. So I want you to look closely at your own city today. Consider the geography you navigate every single day. Is there a physical threshold, maybe a bridge spanning a river, a valley cutting through hills, or even just a seemingly mundane intersection that has served the exact same function across completely different eras?
What are the invisible borders and the ancient gates that you are crossing on your daily commute without even realizing it?
Because the spaces we inhabit shape our destinies just as forcefully as we shape them. Sometimes a concrete tower isn't just a tower. Sometimes it's an ancient acupuncture point holding down the memory of the world. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.